Welcome back to Tetracan Super Monoblock. Now this channel is mainly about fixing and using Tascam Portastudios, that kind of thing. Something slightly different for me today, which is a product unboxing, overview and review. If you followed my channel, you've seen me using a variety of devices in my work. A little Chinese oscilloscope, exposed PCB, a separate frequency counter, a separate digital multimeter, which I'm using both for testing resistances and testing capacitance and so on, but also for checking electrical continuity. The oscilloscope, the frequency counter, all these kind of things, they were cheap to buy in the first place, but it's a bit of a hassle to kind of plug them in when you've already got loads of wires running everywhere in order to plug in the Portastudio and input devices and speakers and everything. So I thought I'd have a look at this multimeter with an oscilloscope, which is also a frequency counter built into it, so I can do most of the work I do with one handheld battery powered unit and a minimum of cables. So as you can see, it's kind of unbranded. I've seen it on Amazon and Wish and a lot of stores like this, variously branded as MUSTOOL, KKMoon. I imagine that's a kind of private branding strategy by the resellers, and there's some kind of factory somewhere in China or somewhere like that that's churning these out. Quite cheap. I think I paid £53 for this, which is about the same as all the things that it replaces, but with the convenience that I've only got the one box. So I already opened this because I forgot that unboxing is a thing on YouTube. So it'll look slightly disheveled as I open it, but you get an impression of what's inside. So it comes in this box. These probes in a sealable bag. And they look pretty good quality. They've got little plugs on them to protect the electrical contacts and everything from scratching anything in there. I actually prefer to work with banana cables leading to crocodile clips here, because if I'm using this darker colour to represent ground, I can clip that onto the chassis somewhere and I can just move around that, touching contacts much as I would do with the positive probe here, but I can also clip onto, you know, the exposed wire on a resistor, or like a little bit of protruding wire on the rear side of a PCB. I find that these kinds of sockets are actually compatible. I can fit that into the socket for this on the main unit, which is inside this glossy bag. Here's the meter itself. It's not quite in shot. I'll turn it around like that. Comes with a stand. Some of these you have to remove a screw to get at the batteries. Not so with this. It takes AA's, which are a little bit easier to get hold of than 9-volt batteries that some meters take, so that's good. And then we've got a manual, and in my case the first language is English, and I haven't actually read any of this. Let's find a passage to see what the English is like. Insert the banana plug of the black test probe into the negative COM jack and insert the plug of the red test probe into the positive V jack. Yeah, that seems like actual English as opposed to what's perhaps derogatively termed as Chinglish. It seems like their localization process for the manual is pretty good. I'll get some batteries in here and we'll start using it. Quick word on build quality here. It feels okay. It doesn't feel very cheap or anything. One thing I have noticed is that from time to time these buttons are kind of getting stuck under the edge like that. Not a huge problem. It's not that the buttons are unresponsive or anything. I mean, if I'm going to compare it with a slightly more market branded digital multimeter like this one, this does feel more sturdy. It's got this rubberized thing on top of it. The buttons aren't getting stuck. Okay, so I've put the 3 AA batteries in there. Let's turn this guy on. So it's quite a nice brightly lit screen. The resolution of it, you can see some sort of pixels there. Not super sharp, and that's not necessarily apparent in the images that come with the Amazon listing, but we'll see if that's going to be adequate for the oscilloscope. I don't know exactly how long the battery life is, I haven't had it long enough, but it's got an auto off function. It'll turn itself off automatically after 15 minutes. And just because it's using 3 AA batteries, I imagine that means it's quite a small current draw. Right, let's have a look at measuring capacitance. The range of capacitances this unit can measure is from 15 nanofarads up to 10 microfarads. Microfarads, if you haven't done a lot of electronics, that might sound like that's a small value. Actually, a farad is a huge amount of capacitance, and it's quite rare to find capacitors that have one or more farads, and you would find that in an industrial application usually. I think the largest capacitances that I've seen in any Portastudio were under 5,000 nanofarads, so about half of what this can measure. If you're going for a small value up to 100 nanofarads, then there's two ways that you can go about this. The first of those ways, it comes under this sort of multi-mode here. So you would have your positive lead going into this socket and your negative lead into this one. It does display polarity, but I would tend to pick up the positive lead, which is yellow in my case, to the positive lead of the capacitor, and hook up the blue lead, which is negative in my case, to the negative lead. Then you can turn to this mode, press select, and that will cycle through these four methods. So this is measuring resistance, that's your diode tester, that's continuity testing, and then here we have the capacitance testing, and you press dis, and after a short pause you will get a reading, and you can see that's pretty much bang on 100 microfarads, which is what this is rated at, so it's within its tolerances. You can also measure small capacitances a different way, which also allows you to measure larger capacitances as well. And for that one you have to adjust where these are inputs. You would have your positive here, microfarads, and this one, blue one, not in common but in the cap. And then you would turn this to the microfarad range. For a small value like that, again you press dis, and it'll take a second to charge up. Or maybe that was instantaneous. So I think that's saying that it's 89 microfarads, so I'm not getting quite such an accurate reading at that range, but you can do it from this setting. However, where before I would have got an OL overload response from the meter, if I was in that mode there, I can now take a larger capacitor like this 3300 microfarad one. As far as I can tell, the way these work is the capacitor needs to charge up before the meter can take a reading on it. I don't recall it being faster on more expensive meters that I've used. So for my purposes, say I've got a problem with the power board and the Tascam 244, and I'm wondering if one of the capacitors has changed value enough that that's causing the problem, I can desolder it, discharge it, take it out of circuit and measure it. So for my purposes, this seems to be perfectly adequate. One of the functions that I use most often on a multimeter is the continuity tester. Use that to check that the tracks on PCBs are okay, but also to test fuses. This is a fuse that's been removed from the daughter board of a EU or UK region Tascam 244. So if I have it in this position and then I use select to pass through diode mode to continuity tester, you can see there's the little speaker in there. So if there's less than 50 ohms resistance, it will beep. Grab one end of the fuse, and you can tell that one's still intact. What I will note is there's a very slight latency, like it takes a fraction of a second to turn on and to turn off when that's removed. Very slightly annoying, but not very annoying compared to the convenience of having everything in the one unit, I don't think. Let's see how this responds for voltage readings. Simples, it works. And here we have the frequency counter, so if I press play, my test tape is meant to be 3000 Hertz. I haven't actually calibrated this one yet, but you can see it's quite close to it anyway. It's going to fluctuate by a few Hertz, just because of irregularities in the motor speed, so I don't see any problem there. That's definitely working just as well as this little oscilloscope that I was using for that purpose, and better than the crappy exposed PCB frequency counter that I was using for a while before that. Let's have a look at the oscilloscope facility, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty disappointed with it. This is about as good as I can get, where it's slowly drawing this very pixelated waveform that I can store it, but I can't really zoom in on it. That's me in millivolt range. You switch between this sort of typical digital multimeter display and the oscilloscope displayed by holding that button, and then the timing you change using this del and celle button that end up being your up and down arrows for the timing range. What I was finding is it'll work in this mode, AC voltage, but then if I enter that, I'm getting a constant signal instead of one that's constantly being redrawn from left to right. But there's no way to zoom in on that because the signal that's coming out of the tape output on this Tascam 424 Mark II is a small fraction of 1 volt. Most oscilloscopes you'll be able to kind of zoom in so the height of your oscillating wave filled the screen. There's just no real way to do that. I mean, when I'm like testing for distortion or whatever, I mean, I tend to use my ears. I tend to use an audio probe more than I rely on the visual information from an oscilloscope, but that is disappointing. I mean, it advertises itself as a multimeter and oscilloscope, and it's a perfectly capable multimeter, and it's a perfectly capable frequency counter, but frankly, the scope facility is pretty shit. And on the occasions where I do require visual feedback, I'll still be using this very cheap Chinese one. It was completely adequate in a way that this unit isn't. Imagining that the oscilloscope in this guy had worked better, another relative disadvantage compared to using this is this has got BNC socket, but you can get these BNC to RCA adapters pretty easily. That means you can just plug an RCA to RCA cable from the tape out of a Portastudio into this. Whereas in order to measure frequency using a multimeter, then I had to fashion this. I mean, it only took me 5 minutes, but basically I've chopped a RCA to RCA cable and stripped it, and I've got the positive and negative wires exposed, and I've tinned them with solder, and then you attach crocodile clip at one end and the banana plug into the meter at the other end. So in summary, I am slightly disappointed with this. It's not that it doesn't do everything that this does just as well. It's just that this is priced pretty much the same as X-Tech and maybe still below Fluke. And the basis for that is that it's got an oscilloscope in it as well, and the oscilloscope is actually pretty basic. The fact that you can't zoom in on a voltage range, vertically, so to speak, makes it kind of useless for dealing with very small AC voltages, which as somebody that's trying to restore audio gear, pretty much the only thing that I'm using that for to begin with. So it's not a terrible purchase, but for me, mainly sticking with this guy and occasionally using this if I have to be able to see what's happening is probably still what I'm going to be doing. I do want to find a solution that's, this size or very slightly bigger that also does what this does for me and also does what this does for me. So this is, what I'm using instead of a function generator often. I think Handtech do something where it's got a function generator and a more fully featured oscilloscope as well. So I may follow up on my journey to find an affordable all-in-one unit. My closing advice is if you can get this really cheap, great, but unless you're dealing with much higher voltage applications than I am, tube amps it would work fine for, I think. Because it's meant to deal with up to 600 volts, and I guess voltage swing on a tube amp's like up to 300, but for hi-fi equipment, that kind of thing, forget about it. It's not really a good solution. I hope that's been helpful. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.